Hello, everyone. Welcome to British History Live with me, Philippa Lacey-Broad. I hope you're all well. I'm streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. And tonight we're talking about, well, the main subject will be about Charles I and Oliver Cromwell, the bizarre story of how they both lost their heads on the same day, one in retribution for the killing of the other. But we will cover that in more detail. I hope you are all well wherever you're looking from, wherever you're watching from. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe you are one of the ones, well, you will be one of the ones who have contributed to me reaching 1 million views just as I came on air. I found that out. So thank you so much. So the main topic of today, Charles I and Oliver Cromwell. It's a very interesting and bizarre set of events. I'm going to be going into how Charles I, as king, was able to be tried for treason. And if you don't understand why that would be an issue, I'm going to go into that as well. And then the hoops and legal loops that were jumped through to be able to try him, and what came next. So we are doing that. I've got the 3-minute explainer as usual, and I'm going into the English peerage and the titles and explaining which are what and what they mean, because that was a request from my Patreon Carmen. We've got a history in the news, so a story from Warwick historian with a really exciting find at Warwick Castle, which I will go into later. So, and then to finish off with, I of course have what AI served up for me when I asked for a couple of videos this week, which if you've got any suggestions as ones that you would like me to try and get it to do, please feel free. You can comment and I will see if I pick them up. But yeah, if you're worried about AI, maybe there's not a lot to worry about so far. Excuse me if I sound a little bit nasally today. I have got a cold coming, so I've got a nice warm blackcurrant with me to keep me company. So before we get into it, if you're watching, please do hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, if you think this might be for you, of course. And you may be watching on the catch up or listening on the podcast. There is a British history podcast, which you can find. You'll see it's got my face on it because I had to do something that distinguished it from, of course, there is other British history podcasts, because that wasn't a very distinctive title that I came up with. But anyway, it does what it says on the tin. So you can find me. In fact, you can find links to all of those things on my Substack, which is probably the easiest place to find me. If you look me up as Philippa B, or you can look at British History on Substack. That is me. And each week I send out the link to this and also a newsletter with other things on. So anyway, lots of links and just it's all in one place, so it's much easier. Okay, so I'm going to have a sip of my warm blackcurrant, and then we're going to get in to Charles I and Oliver Cromwell. And I know that the Stuarts is not quite as popular a topic as the Tudors, but you have to remember, when we're talking about Charles I, we're only 2 monarchs since Elizabeth I, since the last Tudor. So things have really switched and turned on their head. I'm actually reading a book at the moment about James I. So James I was James VI of Scotland, James I of England, who became king after the death of Elizabeth I. His second cousin. Excuse the notes. So I'm reading Gareth Russell's Queen James. It's out in the UK on the 27th of February. It's out in the US and Canada and the rest of the world, I think, on the 2nd of December. But I will be interviewing Gareth in a couple of weeks' time, and that will be available. I will let you know when that is available. If you're a member of my Patreon, you've been able to submit a question for Gareth. That closes in 5 hours' time. My accent came out there, didn't it? I can't say five without going into my accent. So if you want to ask Gareth Russell a question about James, then I suggest you hop on over to patreon.com/British history as soon as you can, because I'm gathering in the questions to send off to him. Anyway, so I'm preparing for that interview. So you have James I takes over from Elizabeth I. Now, this is relevant, I promise. He brings the promise of, or people think they're going to get a more accepting monarch who's going to be accepting of different religions. He himself is more on the Protestant side, but his mother, of course, was Mary, Queen of Scots, a devout Catholic. And so surely he's going to bring religious tolerance to England. Now, of course, he disappoints, and he disappoints a particularly fervent faction of the Catholic faith, who decide that the best form of action, therefore, and I have a talk on this on YouTube if you want to see it in more detail, is to blow up Parliament, obviously the Gunpowder Plot, as it is known, and to just get rid of the king, get rid of all the lords, get rid of his son Henry, who would have been his heir, and as many of the royal family as possible, as many of the ruling classes as possible. Now, that day, the foiling of the Gunpowder Plot on the 5th of November was marked by a day of Thanksgiving for almost 200 years. 1859, it came off the statute book. Now, of course, in England, we still have bonfire night as a more social, obviously, event. It's not a public holiday or anything like that. But it's still marked. People have still heard about it. And yet it was only 45 years after that that a king was successfully killed. And yet it seems to, maybe with familiarity, becomes a story that isn't as shocking as it should be. And also wrapped up into the bigger the big events that were happening in the 17th century, of course, the English civil wars, and the Republican experiment, Oliver Cromwell, and then the restoration of the monarchy. So I think it's quite interesting. It's an interesting story. We're going to go into it today. And it starts out with how a king could be tried for treason. Now, if you're wondering, well, why can't they? Well, there is a treason, or there was a Treason Act, there still is, but anyway, it came into an Act of Parliament, so an actual law, in 1352. This is the first time it was defined as an Act of Parliament. The crime of treason had already been recognised for a long, long time, but this time, but now it was going to be written into law, and the Act of Treason was defined as an act which involved killing the king, his queen, so the monarch assumed to be a man, obviously his queen, their eldest son and heir, or to imagine the same thing, so plot, plan it. And there was a further clause that included the levying or aiding of war against the crown. So there's a assumption in this already that treason is synonymous with betrayal of the state and the king. It's a disruption of the hierarchy, and in God's in God's society, God has created the structure, God has created the hierarchy. It's a crime against God. Very useful if you are the one who God put on the top. And so long before, because of this supposed crime against God as well, this is for a long time been considered, treason was considered the highest crime one could commit. Of course, it even comes with its own punishment. So this is in a cocktail of thinly veiled symbolism. The punishment for treason is being hung, drawn, and quartered, or drawn, hung, and quartered, if you want to do it in the chronological order, and so everyone understands this is the highest crime that can be committed, and it comes with the most harsh punishment. But in 1352, it's felt that actually kind of need to define this because it's been used a little bit willy-nilly, and it needs to be defined. It's being used in increasingly dubious circumstances, and it's probably better that it's put down on paper. but it's still understood to be generally an action or even a thought against the king and state. And I'm hoping I don't sneeze, sorry, I've got this cold coming. In the Treason Act, the king and state, although they are mentioned as two entities, they're considered one and the same. The king is the embodiment of the state. Now, in 1649, Parliament are seeking to put King Charles I on trial for treason, for what they say are crimes committed by the king against the land and people. The English Civil Wars killed 1 in 10 men and left countless others to severely injured with life-changing injuries. You know, a time where obviously there's no help for that. Benefit systems, healthcare, all of that, you know, nothing obviously like that. So you've got a broken society, you've got broken people, and people want to find a culprit and to find, you know, someone to blame. This always happens anyway, doesn't it, with any massive tragedy? But yes, so people are looking for this anyway, and Parliament, of course, have got the victory. That means God is on their side. God has granted the parliamentarians the victory. Therefore, they must be supporting. Therefore, he must be supporting their actions, and their actions are to remove the king. And therefore, it's a very cyclical argument. Parliament were looking to argue that it was the king who'd caused the country to have to go through the horrors of war. And in an impassioned speech, Cromwell stands up in the House of Commons and convinces those present, or seeks to convince those present, that God was speaking through them, and therefore they have no choice but to carry out his will. And I've spoke about this in an interview with Professor Alice Hunt, who wrote this wonderful book, Republic. It was out in autumn last year. It actually goes through year by year, and we talked about the fact that Cromwell, he really believe that he's doing God's work? And it's a fascinating interview with Alice, which you can, I'll put a link in the show notes about it, with it, so you can go and check that out later. And so it's become clear that the plan is to put the king on trial, or it becomes clear that that's what Parliament, or the leaders in Parliament, want to do. As that becomes clearer, hesitation grows and support for it wanes. And in contrast to that, the hardliners who want this to happen become more fervent, and even in their intention, and even if that means that that it could end up in regicide, it could end up with the killing of the king. Because of course they know that if you're going to go down the route of trying the king for treason, then that's the punishment for treason, is, well, being hung, drawn and quartered, but certainly executed. Excuse me sniffing, I'm so sorry. So how are they going to do this? They set up a committee that's trying to find a legal framework to allow them to put the king on trial. And there's a technical issue, because in the courts of law, then and now, you have a KC, a King's Council, or obviously when the late Queen was alive, a QC. And they are representatives of the king against the defendant in court. So they represent the crown, yeah? So how can you have a representative of the crown pursuing the crown, the king? So it decided that obviously this usual setup of judge and jury isn't going to be suitable. So they decided they're not going to do that. They're going to remove the KC problem, excuse me. And along with that, the jury, which also could be a problem, because that brings in the potential for the unpredictability of what the jury might decide. As their plans continue, hesitation and opposition for them, grow, because they're talking about putting the king on trial for high treason. Many are uncomfortable with this, obviously because they are trying the king for a crime which is going to lead to the death penalty. And the reason he ends up being tried is the result of a military coup. So Parliament have already won, but actually, and I might go on to this a bit more later, but when Parliament wins, there's once they've sort of got the upper hand, which comes a little bit, no, it's sort of already started, and it comes a bit grows as well, is a lot of disagreement as to what the next stages look like. Okay, we've done this, we've gone through this war that has killed 1 in 10 of our country folk, our fellow countrymen, and good, because we were all going for complete equity, weren't we? Or we were going for this or that or the other. Anyway, it comes to it, there's a lot of different views as to what was going to happen. Excuse me. Can't believe my cold came on about 2 hours before I was due to. Anyway, sorry. So, so the fact that they can put the king on trial, or the fact they can get this through Parliament, is because they have this military coup. You might have heard of it, Pride's Purge, where 45 MPs are arrested, or 45 were arrested. Furthermore, were barred from coming into Parliament, and they were the ones who had been dissenting, the ones that were hesitating, the ones they thought maybe they wouldn't be able to get the support of in order to pass this action against the king. So Pride's Purge, it's named after the colonel in control, Thomas Pride. So they purged Parliament in Pride's Purge, and it's left with clearly a much smaller number of MPs, known as the Rump Parliament, or becomes known as the Rump. And they passed this bill, which establishes a special High Court of Justice, purely for the purpose of trying the king. And so instead of a judge and a jury, what they're going to do is appoint 150 commissioners. And these commissioners are going to ensure justice prevails, and there's due process and a fair trial. Okay, of course, the 150 really are there to get through the answer that Parliament want. Of 100, so they passed this bill that says this is what they're going to do. 150 commissioners. They only manage to appoint 135 commissioners. Of those 135 who are actually commissioned, on the first day of the king's trial, which was the 20th of January 1649, only 54 of them are in attendance. The second day, that drops to 46. So just to give you an idea of the level of objection to the trial itself, and the way that they're going about doing the action in it completely. So okay, they've got their edict from God. Most people, I think we can safely say, are not agreeing with that. So they've got rid of the ones that are going to object, passed a bill through Parliament. It's based on them appointing these commissioners. They don't actually appoint anywhere near as many commissioners as they are supposed to. And of those, just over a third turn up on the first day and less than on the second day. So what other evidence, though, are they going to present against the king? So their argument is that Charles initiated and inflicted the war, and therefore tyranny, on his people. And this obviously led to all of these deaths, the destruction that's come of lives, of towns, of villages, of the landscape. And they based this evidence on the concession that Charles made during attempted peace negotiations. Charles was held as prisoner on the Isle of Wight, and they went to try and negotiate a peace, and there was hope for this peace. And again, I spoke to I think I covered this with Alice. I know I certainly covered this with Jonathan Healy, who wrote another book on the 17th century, The Blazing World. This is my latest interview that was out last month. So, and we talk about the fact that Charles actually kind of tried to sorry, lots of people had hope for him to want to negotiate peace, and he doesn't. He's very stubborn. He concedes that that he waged a defensive war, and that was used as proof that Charles instigated the war, as was also the fact that he was present on the battlefield. But really, what he's trying to do is buy time, try and negotiate his release, and hoping that his Scottish supporters at the same time are gathering, ready to come to his defence. But his trial opens on the 20th of January, like I say, 1649, in Westminster Hall, which is the only place, pretty much the only part of Westminster, the Palace of Westminster, which still exists. There was a massive fire in 1834, but Westminster Hall is still there. And Charles refuses to recognise the court's jurisdiction. He refuses to accept that they can try him in any capacity. The evidence against him is weak, as we've just gone over. They don't really have a very good justification for the way they've gone about it, the trial itself, and how they've gone about it. They've literally had to have a committee to decide how they were going to do it, pass a bill through Parliament, so they could have this court, special court, especially to try the king. So everything really should be going against the parliamentarians. However, ironically, the unwillingness of the king to defend himself, so to recognise the court and therefore defend himself, meant that it was a foregone conclusion. It wasn't a good idea, but it was a foregone conclusion. 10 days later, they have the crowds gather outside Banqueting House and Whitehall Palace. Again, actually, Banqueting House, the only part, again, pretty much of the Palace of Whitehall, just up the road from the Palace of Westminster, which survived a fire in I think it was in William and Mary's reign. But anyway, the crowds gather outside to see the execution of Charles, and he's brought through the Banqueting House and out onto a scaffold in front of Banqueting House. It's really strange now because it's just a busy road and a pavement, and people are walking through that site all the time. And I do wonder how many actually know what happened there. But those crowds that are gathered there that day witness, and I don't know how many thought it would go through, but that it would actually happen. It kind of has more public but tones of the execution of Anne Boleyn, and how many people really thought that would happen. But obviously that was more in private, stood in front of a lot of people. And there's this collective groan that goes up when Charles is actually beheaded. I mean, not to be too corny, but they've literally saw in front of their eyes the detachment of king and country. The king and the state, or the king is no longer synonymous with the kingdom. And in fact, the response to both the king's trial and to his execution is quite subdued. It's of a people who are worn down, they're tired, and they're hoping that any change in circumstances will mean improvement. The Republic is bringing with it promises that the removal of the king means the removal or the absence of tyranny. Now, as I said, now we get to the point where all these people who've advocated for less sovereign power, more power to Parliament. When it comes to it, they now disagree on what that actually looks like. And so, what religious makeup is going to be tolerated, how is governance going to look, and all sorts of things. Really well looked into in both Alice and Jonathan's books, and also Anna Key's book called The Restless Republic. So if you're interested in this time period, those three books, Republic by Alice Hunt, The Blazing World by Jonathan Healy, and The Restless Republic by Anna Key, are all really worth your time. I think Jonathan's and Anna's book you can get on Audible, and I think maybe now Alice's book as well. So we begin what would turn out to be an 11-year experiment. Not that anyone knows that, and not that the Republic feels like it's going to be reversed until really quite far into at the end of it, in fact. So we get this 11-year experiment with running as a republic. It's later termed the Interregnum by the returning Stuart dynasty, because the monarchy, it's not really a spoiler alert, the monarchy is restored in 1660. But there was a lot of it that looked very much the same as had been, including the role of king, which Oliver Cromwell was really in all but name, and in fact almost in name as well. He was begged by his MPs to take the title of king. I don't know if you know this. Again, Alice covers this really well in her book. In March 1657, MPs voted 123 to 62 that Cromwell should be named, and that is have the title of king. So King Oliver, they wanted him to be king. And they presented this to him in what's called the Humble Petition and Advice. They presented that to him in Banqueting House at Whitehall Palace on the 31st of March, 1657. He took some time to think about it, pray on it. On the 3rd of April, he formally responded that he could not be king, he decided. They didn't stop. They continued to lobby him throughout April. They really, really wanted him to take the title of king. And I think part of the justification was people understood what a king did. They understood how that worked. And there wasn't really, they hadn't worked out what was going to come after they'd done this. So king worked. Anyway, he ends up being Lord Protector, which was also a title that would have been recognised in regencies in the past. So again, I cover this in my interview with Alice in more detail. It's really, really interesting. Now, it comes to the end because Oliver Cromwell dies, and he dies on the 3rd of September, 1658 at Whitehall Palace. And again, there seems to be a lack of a plan as to what would happen should Oliver Cromwell die. And they've sort of, I mean, they have been discussing this, I suppose, but they fall on the idea that it should be a hereditary title and the role should go to Oliver's son, Richard Cromwell. He proves to have neither the qualifications nor the enthusiasm of his father. And the Republic really does fall apart quite quickly after that. Just to underline how close Oliver Cromwell's role was to being a king, his funeral was a full-on state funeral. Again, no precedent. What do you do for a Lord Protector? Well, they treated him like a king, which he may or may not have appreciated. He had there was a wax effigy lit by candlelight, which lay in state in Somerset House. It lay there from the 18th of October through to the 23rd of November, which was the date of his state funeral. His effigy was robed. It had the scepter in one hand, the orb in the other, and a crown resting on a cushion nearby, supposedly to represent the state, not to be his crown. Now, he'd actually been buried 2 weeks earlier. So the coffin on which the effigy lay, topped, was empty. His body, although it had been embalmed, one of the physicians who had embalmed him on the 4th of September, his account says that his body was filled with spices, wrapped in a 4-fold care cloth, but first into a coffin of lead and then into a wooden one, yet it purged and wrought through all, so that there was a necessity of interring it before the solemnity of his funeral. So basically, they'd buried Cromwell almost straight away because his body had decomposed too quickly. And so I don't know how many people would have known that at the time. He was buried in the Lady Chapel of Westminster Abbey, better known to us as the Henry VII Chapel. Seems a bit cheeky. Although we'll come on to who else is buried there in a minute. The funeral procession, which went from Somerset House through to Westminster Abbey, took 7 hours to process. By the time they got to the Abbey, it was dark and there was no candles, but there was also no body to bury. So everything sort of came to a halt, came to a stop, and everyone went home. And there was no further ceremony. He was buried, the place he was buried in Henry VII's chapel was really close to his daughter, Elizabeth. And any of you who've read the book The Palace by Gareth, plug Gareth's books, but there is a chapter in there on Cromwell and his time at Hampton Court Palace, and his daughter Elizabeth, who was supposedly his favourite, had died there on the 6th of August earlier that year, 1658. We're in. So she'd actually died less than a month before him. He was devastated, and there was and is probably speculation that the loss of Elizabeth quickened his death. She'd been brought by barge down to Westminster Abbey, and she had been, I think she'd been buried on the 10th of August. After her body had laid in state briefly in the Painted Chamber at Westminster Palace, sorry, which was lost in the fire. Fast forward to the 23rd of April, 1661, and the Abbey is the site of a much happier occasion. And this is the pomp and pageantry back. This is the coronation of Charles II, the first king of the restored monarchy, the son of the executed Charles I. He landed at Dover on the 25th of May, 1660, and he had processed into London on the 29th of May. That's his 30th birthday. He'd been invited back by Parliament. This is the way they decided to go after the Republic had faltered on the death of Cromwell. But amongst all those celebrations and reconciliations, Charles is brewing plans for revenge for the killers, specifically of his father, those who had signed Charles I's death warrant in 1649. They were in line for some serious retribution, including the already dead and buried Oliver Cromwell. As Charles II had processed from Westminster Hall to the Abbey and from the Abbey back to the Hall, if he'd have looked up over Westminster Hall, he would have seen the decomposing heads of Oliver Cromwell and 2 other regicides, Henry Ireton, who was actually Cromwell's son-in-law, and Judge John Bradshaw, who'd been the judge at Charles I's trial. There had been an act in the summer of 1660, the Act of Free and General Pardon, Indemnity and Oblivion, that had passed kind of put a I don't know, a full stop maybe after the after all the fighting. However, that did not extend to the signatories of the death warrant. And anyone who was still alive was tracked down if they could be. However, Cromwell, Ireton, and Bradshaw were coming in for some special treatment, all of whom had died before the Restoration. They'd all been buried in Henry VII Chapel, the Lady Chapel of Westminster Abbey. They had been disinterred on the 26th of January, 1661. They were taken to the Red Lion Inn. That's a pub, or an inn, obviously. The Red Lion Inn in Holborn, which still exists, I checked. And stored in the yard of the pub overnight before, on the anniversary of the execution of Charles I, the 30th of January, the bodies were taken to Tyburn and they were hung and then they were decapitated and their bodies thrown into a pit, but their heads stuck on 20-foot poles above Westminster Hall. So as Charles II processed to and from his coronation in a month or so after, in April, so February, March, April, 3 months afterwards, the heads would have been there. Looked up and seen those. And actually, the head of Cromwell, I don't know about the others, but the head of Cromwell was still there apparently 20 years later until it disappeared, potentially as a storm, although I'd have thought there'd have been some other storms in 20 years, but we'll see. And Oliver Cromwell's head made its way into, I think it did the rounds a bit, and it made its way into the hands of the Wilkinson family. And they kept it and passed it down until finally in 1960, one of the family decided that it should be buried, and it's interred in the antechapel of Sidney, Sussex, in Cambridge, where he had attended as an undergraduate in 1660. Now, in case you're wondering, because I did mention that Elizabeth Cromwell's body also was buried in the Henry VII Chapel. She remains there undisturbed to this day. She had been known to intercede with her father. Hi, Julian. She had been known to intercede with her father over, being lenient towards royalists, and so perhaps that was one of the reasons I would probably go to far as to suggest that the fact that she was in there and she wasn't guilty of the crime of signing the death warrant, that she wasn't on Charles's list. But there you go. So Charles I and Oliver Cromwell are beheaded on the same day, 30th of January, 12 years apart, and in fact, Cromwell 2 years after he died. So there you go. Right. Okay. So that's the story for today. I can see the comments. Yeah. So I get both sides of people who either don't like it scripted or think I should be more scripted. So the thing is, it's great that YouTube has so many people on it. And so if you don't like one presenter, there's plenty to choose from, isn't there? And it might be that you prefer something like my interviews, which are more scripted. Oh, my nose is so red. And they are all available for you to watch. So no problem there. So there we go. That was that. So interviews I just mentioned there as well that you might want to go and have a look at. Susie Edge. I don't know if I mentioned Susie when I was just talking, but Dr. Susie Edge has written a few books, Mortals and was it Mortals and Monarchs? Mortal Monarchs, excuse me. And we talked about the horrors of history, tortures and treatments. So much so that the video was demonetized. So there you go. But it is there. You can go and watch it. So that's Susie Edge. Obviously, my interview with Alice Hunt, my interview with Jonathan Healy, and also, if you're just interested in the period, my interview with Andrea Zuvich about Charles II's mistress, Barbara Villiers, who went over to kind of the shadow court of Charles and came back with him. That's how she met him. So, okay, let's move on. History in the news. So just before I do that, if you are enjoying it, please do subscribe to the channel. Maybe give it a thumbs up. And yeah, let's do that. And can we keep well, it's up to you, but I would suggest keep the political comments out of the chat because it's highly irrelevant, basically. Okay, so thank you to Aaron for this. How do I get up? Here we go. Thank you to Aaron for this story. He's Warwick_historian on Instagram if you want to follow him. And this week, he posted this story. So with his permission, I am sharing it with you tonight. We're back to Tudors. So anyone who's into the Tudors, you'll like this. And Aaron was asked to go over to Warwick Castle to have a look at a recent discovery they've made during conservation work. And this is a piece of plaster ceiling that that they found whilst they were, as far as I understand, whilst they were looking at some plaster work they knew come from the 1668 to 72, it says here, and found plaster work underneath. The exciting thing about this is that if you can see from this photo, in the middle, there is the ragged staff. And that the bear and the ragged staff, of course, is the symbol for Warwickshire and for the Warwick family. And the Warwick family owned the castle between 1590 and 1668. Sorry, they weren't. They were there before that. Excuse me. So the fact that the symbol was there suggests that that this is their work, and from much earlier. The elder brother of Robert Dudley, Ambrose Dudley, who actually therefore as the elder brother held the title Earl of Warwick. He lived at Warwick Castle between 1562 and 1590. So this suggests that maybe this is from the time that he was there, and potentially was created in order for a state visit from Elizabeth I, which happened in 1572 here. So I think there's more work to do. There's more investigation to be done, but it's looking very exciting. There's the initial as well, A, and I don't know whether is that supposed to be the W as well? But anyway, the initial A, W, to indicate or to suggest Ambrose Warwick, Ambrose Earl of Warwick. So I thought that was really interesting. Thank you very much to Aaron for letting me share that story today. And yeah, so go follow Aaron, Warwick_historian, if you want to see the how that develops. Oh, I've got my 3-minute explainer to do. Thanks to Carmen. So if you have I mean, some of you may not like me to do this. But anyway, those of you who do, a 3-minute explainer is where I was going to put a timer up, but I haven't. I'm going to give it a go to explain something that you're just wondering about, what you're pondering about. And Carmen asked me for to explain the UK's system of titles, the peerage system. So here goes. In the peerage system, there's 5 titles. In descending order of precedence, excuse me, it goes, and this is below monarch, but you've got Duke, Marquess, Earl, Viscount, and Baron. Duke being the highest ranking, Baron being the lowest ranking out of those. Within those ranks, there's also a level of precedence, and the the highest level of precedence goes to the title which has been around the longest, basically. So you have dukes, like I say, at the top, from the Latin dux, D-U-X. So yeah, which means a leader, apparently. You've got royal members of the family. You've got members of the royal family who are dukes, but you don't have to be a member of the royal family to be a duke. And a duke can be bestowed on someone in the royal family, actually, normally when they get married or they come of age. So you'll notice Prince William, when he married Kate Middleton, became the Duke of Cambridge. Then you have, so after dukes, you have marquesses. They were actually, when it first came about, a marquess, they were the equivalent of sort of an earl or count, which are the same, but they were on border countries, so marsh countries, the marches, if you like, marquesses. Then you have the earls. These were introduced by our Danish King Canute, who we talked about 2 episodes ago. And that is the same as in other countries called their count, which explains then why the level below that is the viscount. So basically the vice count. And then below that you have the barons, which literally meant man. So this is somebody who would be a landowner. And the peerages can be hereditary, in which case they are sent down via the male line until they become extinct. Baronies can be given for life, or they can be hereditary. If they're given for life, then the title dies with them. So while they're alive, I think all of these actually, while they're alive, the children of them have titles, but they die out with the person who dies. Sorry, excuse me. I was just getting distracted. I think the dog's barking. Anyway, you probably can't hear it, so that's fine. You've also got, obviously, the honorific titles of Sir and Lady. They're the recipients of knighthoods and damehoods, and they're linked to either types of orders of chivalry, or the majority of them are actually given out in recognition for outstanding contributions to society. They're the ones that are given out on the New Year's honours list and the birthday honours list. So there you are. They're the titles. So your peerage is 5 titles: dukes, marquess, earls, viscounts, and barons. And then you also have sirs and ladies who are given knighthoods and damehoods. And well, actually, no, I haven't got it written down here, but it was interesting that the wives of knights are ladies, but the husbands of knights or the husbands or wives of dames don't have an equivalent title for themselves, which I thought was a shame. Don't know why. So there you go. Okay, so we've got 2 more things. The first one is history events, which I was going to tell you about. It was tell you about some events which are going on. And the last thing before we close is what I asked AI to do for me this week. And honestly, it's entertaining, which is the whole point. But my goodness, it's a good job I didn't need these videos actually for anything particular. So this week you might have seen I have been down to Harvington Hall in Worcestershire, excuse me. You might have seen it on my Instagram and on Harvington Hall's Instagram that I was there. I am going to be the podcaster there, the official podcaster there for the Harvington History Festival in July. So you can get your tickets for that now. It's an in-person event. So, but if you are coming, then I will be there. Please do come and say hello. If you're not coming, then listen to my podcast, the British History Podcast, and I will be sharing some behind the scenes content and some chats with the historians there. There's 18 different events a whole plethora of incredible historians. If I start listing them off, I'm going to miss somebody, which I don't want to do. So I'm not going to do that. But harvingtonhall.co.uk, you can get your tickets there and you can see the lineup. They are selling really fast. So if you are able to come to it, probably check that out sooner rather than later. But for you who can't travel or aren't traveling to the country this year, I have another history festival, my own, that you might be interested in. It's the Wars of the Roses we're doing this year on our online history festival. This is our 5th online history festival. We have 6 speakers talking about various aspects. We have Gareth Russell. Nathan Armin, Matt Lewis, Julian Humphreys, Ewan Roger, and Elizabeth Norton, all speaking about various different aspects. So if you go to my Instagram, which is British_history_tours, you will see on my grid, I did bombard people over the weekend, but you'll see why if you go to my grid, everything's in one place. All the speakers, all of their talk titles, and all of the information about that event. The tickets are really well priced, and it's one ticket for the entire weekend. You can access all of the talks. There are also 2 live events. We have a speaker panel. So all of the speakers will be live at a Q&A panel on the Sunday evening. It's running from the 21st till the 23rd of March. I should have mentioned that. So the live speaker Q&A is on the 23rd of March. And so you can submit your questions. You can come along and put your questions to the speakers. And following that, we have a closing just for fun quiz where you can test your knowledge to see if you just for fun, to test your knowledge if you were listening to the talks. So that is all available if you go to Eventbrite and look at Wars of the Roses, .eventbrite.co.uk, and you can get your tickets there, or you can follow the link off my link tree on YouTube and on Instagram. Another, though, exhibition, this is an in-person one, but I wanted to flag it because it's closing on the 23rd of Feb. So if you happen to be in London and you're looking for something to do, because there isn't already enough, but of course, the British Museum have got an exhibition called Silk Roads, and so like I say, it's entering its final weeks. And of course, the Silk Roads are, we're a network of overlapping trade networks, more like a web really, that linked Asia, Africa, Europe. And this exhibition focuses on a 500-year period between 500 to 1000 AD, and which is around the time where you see the rise of universal religions and that spread. So that's very interesting. If I could get down to London, I would certainly be getting down to see that one. But yeah, so there's 3 events for you, sort of near, far, and online for you. Okay, let's do AI to finish. And then just before we do, if you are around on the 17th of Feb, that's when I will be back live. I have another 3-minute explainer to do, suggested by Tina in my Patreon, so I'll be doing that. And yeah, if you've enjoyed it, then I hope you come back. I have more videos coming out, interviews and virtual tours. Just a matter of editing them and they will be out. So before I leave, okay, I have an Anne Boleyn related AI and I have a King Canute. So we're going across. Oh no, I should mention actually, King Canute's just reminded me. History After Dark, which I do with Dr. Kat Marchant from Reading the Past on YouTube, and Catherine Ibbotson. History After Dark, we've got a new series and it went live last Wednesday. We are doing history cock-ups, and these are things that did not go to plan. So last week was Frobisher's Foolery, where Frobisher is trying to find the North Passage and what happened there. This Wednesday, it will be the turn of William I and his coronation, which went very wrong. So look on the History After Dark YouTube channel, and it will also be available on the History After Dark podcast. Must mention that. It's really, we're very proud of our new series. It's very, very good. Okay, so these are, okay, so I asked AI if it could give me a video of Anne Boleyn's coronation. Now I'm going to show it you. I've slowed it down. There's nothing much to see here, right? Until you see her headdress. And I'm now wondering if Catherine of Aragon somehow programmed this AI, because she's got devil horns. So the AI has decided to give Anne Boleyn, I mean, no, she's also got bare shoulders, and no hood, but she has devil horns. So I don't know what was going on there. And the next one, our final one for this evening, is King Canute, who you may know from the legend. He was one of our Danish kings, the one, really. His son sort of did it for a bit afterwards. But anyway, King Canute is the one of legend who set up his throne on the beach and commanded the sea not to wet him. So I thought, let's ask, let's see what AI makes of this. How would AI depict this? Well, this, my friends, is the warrior King Canute. Oh, which, by the way, when I tried to spell it CNUT, like it is spelled in some sources, it said it was against its terms to do anything with that. I need to sneeze. It clearly misread it. So I had to put in CANUTE so that it would do anything. So there's one thing. But here he is, our warrior King Canute, on his throne, commanding the sea not to wet him. Oh God, excuse me. I'm going to have a big blow in my nose when I'm off. So there he is, in his trainers and his white socks and what looks like a mix between a football shirt and a pinny. Or maybe is that supposed to be a waistcoat? And the reason the sea isn't wetting him is because he's just pulling his feet up like a kid. So thanks, AI. It's a good job I didn't actually need this video for anything particular. Right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to go and take some cold medicine, have a Lemsip, try not to look like death. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to tune in for History After Dark on Wednesday on the History After Dark channel, and come back and see me on the 17th. All right, everyone, take care. I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.